In the year 701 BCE, on a late summer evening thick with dust and the smell of smoke drifting in from the outer villages, the armies of Sennacherib of Assyria were pressing westward across the Judean foothills. Word had already reached Jerusalem of entire towns emptied by fever, of livestock swelling in the sun, of wells gone bad from the bodies upstream. Inside the walled city, lamps flickered against stone. King Hezekiah's physicians moved between sick rooms carrying small clay bowls, and from every household kitchen came the same low, insistent aroma. Warm flour, crushed garlic, and the faint green bite of freshly pressed olive oil meeting the heat of a clay oven. That smell was not comfort food, it was defense. It was the most widely prescribed antimicrobial therapy of the ancient world, and modern researchers would not fully understand why it worked for another 2,800 years. It wasn't turmeric. Turmeric had barely reached the trade routes of the Levant at that time, a rare and expensive curiosity, traveling slowly west from the Indus. It was bread, specifically a flat round loaf studded with crushed garlic, folded with raw olive oil, baked hot on a stone, and eaten warm before the hour was out. And what it did to the sick was documented not only in Hebrew texts, but in Egyptian papyri, Babylonian tablets, and later Greek and Roman medical writings. This was not folk superstition. This was clinical practice by the standards of its age, and it is quietly being validated, right now, in peer-reviewed journals, as one of the most effective, naturally occurring antibacterial combinations ever studied. Turmeric gets the attention today because curcumin is a single, isolated, marketable compound. It has real research behind it. It works. Nobody here is denying that. But when you stack the combined effect of allicin, diallyl disulfide, diallyl, trisulfide, oleocanthal, hydroxytyrosol, tyrosol, oleuropein, and the wider family of sulfur-active compounds against curcumin alone, the numbers from recent studies point in one direction. Research suggests the garlic and olive oil combination eaten on fresh bread is associated with a broader spectrum antimicrobial response than curcumin taken in isolation. Not narrower, broader, covering a wider range of bacterial strains, including strains that modern antibiotic research has flagged as concerning. And it has been doing this, unchanged, for at least 3,000 years. Let me take you back inside those kitchens so you can understand why this bread existed in the first place. First millennium Judea was a land where infection killed. A cut that became inflamed could end a life. A stomach upset from contaminated water could turn fatal in a day. There were no pharmacies, no cold chain, no synthesized anything. The people who lived in that landscape did not have the luxury of waiting for symptoms to escalate. They treated preventatively. They ate preventatively. Every household had a hearth. Every hearth had a flat stone or a thick clay plate for baking, often built into the wall and radiating warmth long after the fire had died down. Nearly every household baked some version of this garlic loaf at least twice a week. Not only for flavor, though it was delicious, for survival. The scripture reference many people don't connect to this practice is in the book of Numbers, chapter 11, where the wandering Israelites, tired of manna, remember fondly the leeks, the onions, and the garlic they had eaten in Egypt. That is not a throwaway verse. That is a population that had lived for generations in one of the most disease-ridden empires of the ancient world, and who relied on alliums, the onion garlic family, as part of their daily survival food. When they lost access to garlic in the wilderness, they did not merely miss the flavor, they missed the protection. They understood intuitively and through long observation that something about those pungent bulbs kept their families from falling ill on long journeys, in crowded camps, and through the hot months when food spoiled fast. Here is where the modern research begins to line up with the ancient observation. When you crush a raw garlic clove, a reaction triggers within seconds. The bulb's cells rupture, and an enzyme called alliinase, which until that moment was held in a separate compartment inside the clove, is released to meet a sulfur-containing amino acid called alliin, the two meet. Alliinase converts alliin into allicin. Allicin is the compound responsible for the sharp smell, the bite on the tongue, and as multiple studies from the past 2 decades have shown, a remarkable antibacterial effect against a surprising range of pathogens. From allicin, over the next several minutes, secondary compounds continue to form. Diallyl disulfide and diallyl trisulfide among them, each with its own research profile in the antimicrobial and cardiovascular literature. Research published in the Journal of Antimicrobial Chemotherapy has documented allicin's activity against multi-drug resistant bacterial strains at concentrations achievable through diet. A 2017 review in Current Opinion in Chemical Biology described allicin as one of the most studied, naturally occurring antimicrobials in the scientific literature. A 2019 paper in the Journal of Medicinal Food examined diallyl trisulfide and found measurable effects on biofilm formation in several bacterial species, associated with the same sulfur chemistry that gives crushed garlic its characteristic pungency. And here is why the 10-minute window matters so much, and why almost nobody in a modern kitchen respects it. Alliinase is an enzyme, and enzymes operate on kinetics. The moment a clove is crushed, the reaction begins, but it does not finish instantly. Alliinase and alliin, previously separated inside the intact cells of the clove, now have to find each other in the mash, bind, react, and release allicin. Allicin concentration climbs steeply over the first several minutes, peaks somewhere around the 10-minute mark, and then begins to fall as the allicin itself decomposes into the secondary sulfur compounds and eventually into inactive byproducts. If you crush the garlic and use it immediately, you have captured only a small fraction of the potential yield. If you crush it and let it sit an hour, before cooking, the peak has passed and degradation has taken over. Worse, if you crush it and apply high heat within seconds, which is exactly what most modern recipes do, you denature the alliinase before it can finish its work. The enzyme unfolds, loses its shape, and the reaction stops mid-step. You end up with cooked garlic that tastes lovely, but delivers a small fraction of the active chemistry the clove was capable of producing. The ancient preparation method, whether the bakers could articulate the reason or not, lands almost exactly inside the enzyme's optimal window. Crush, rest, combine with oil, apply gentle heat briefly, eat warm. It is enzyme kinetics rendered as ritual, passed down through the hands of grandmothers who never heard the word enzyme and never needed to. But here is what makes the biblical bread distinct. It wasn't just garlic, it was garlic plus raw olive oil. And olive oil, particularly the cold-pressed, unfiltered kind common in ancient Judea, contains oleocanthal, a compound that biochemists at the Monell Chemical Senses Center identified in 2005 and found to behave in the body very similarly to ibuprofen, not in quantity, in mechanism. It is associated with suppression of the same inflammatory pathway. The same oil also carries hydroxytyrosol and tyrosol, two of the most studied natural phenolic antioxidants, along with oleuropein, a bitter-tasting compound that has been investigated for decades for its antioxidant and antimicrobial properties. Research published in Phytotherapy. Research has examined oleuropein's activity against a range of bacterial and viral targets in laboratory conditions and suggested it may support the body's natural defenses. A 2021 paper in Nutrients associated regular consumption of extra virgin olive oil with lowered markers of systemic inflammation in study participants. When you combine crushed garlic with good olive oil, the two compound families do not simply coexist on a plate. Research from multiple nutrition laboratories suggests they interact in ways that may support immune and antimicrobial function beyond what either could do alone. Two separate chemistries, one ancient food, 3,000 years of continuous use. The preparation has been passed down through Middle, Eastern Jewish and early Christian communities with remarkable consistency. A simple dough of whole wheat or barley flour, water, a little coarse salt, and sometimes a small portion of sourdough starter pinched from yesterday's loaf. The baker would knead until the dough went smooth against the palm, then leave it covered with a cloth near the hearth, while the oven stones soaked up heat. The dough was rolled thin, no more than a 1/4 inch thick, the surface faintly dusty with flour. Garlic cloves, anywhere from 3 to 7 depending on the size of the loaf, were crushed by hand with a small stone mortar, never through anything resembling a modern press, because pressure of that kind heats the oil in the clove enough to begin degrading the allicin before it can fully form. The crushed garlic, still sharp enough to sting the eyes of anyone leaning over the bowl, was then folded into a few tablespoons of cold-pressed olive oil and allowed to sit for exactly the length of time it took to tidy the kitchen and tend to the fire. About 10 minutes. That pause is the critical window. The garlic oil mixture was then spread across the rolled dough with the fingers, sometimes rolled, up and flattened again to fold the oil into layers, then slid onto the hot stone for 3 to 5 minutes per side. The outer surface crisped and blistered in patches. The inside stayed slightly soft and warm. The garlic was warmed but not cooked into oblivion, and when the loaf came off the stone, the smell filled the entire house and, depending on the wind, half the street. Now let me be specific about the science, because this is where it gets interesting. A 2018 study in the journal Food Chemistry examined what happens when you heat crushed garlic in the presence of olive oil at various temperatures. The researchers found that at temperatures under roughly 220 degrees Fahrenheit, the allicin remains largely intact. Above that threshold, it degrades rapidly. Traditional ancient bread baking stones, because they were thick and radiated even heat, cooked the dough mostly from the bottom while leaving the garlic topping in a protected range on the upper surface. The ancients, through trial and observation across generations, had stumbled onto the exact preparation that preserved the active compound, and the olive oil on the surface acted as both a flavor carrier and a protective barrier against the highest heat, its lipid layer buffering the allicin from the direct radiant energy of the oven. Every step was functional. Nothing was accidental. What looks like rustic simplicity is, under a modern microscope, careful biochemistry. What about the scale of the health effect? This is where we have to speak carefully and stay on the ground of what research actually supports. The bread is not a cure for infection. It was not understood as such in antiquity either. It was understood as something you ate regularly to stay well, and ate more of when you felt something coming on. Modern research suggests that regular intake of allicin-rich garlic combined with oleocanthal-rich olive oil may support immune function and may be associated with antimicrobial activity at the mucosal surfaces of the mouth, throat, and upper digestive tract. Those are the surfaces the bread first contacts. One study from 2020 in Nutrients documented measurable shifts in oral and gut microbial balance in subjects consuming moderate daily garlic across a 3-week window. A 2022 review in Phytotherapy Research associated regular consumption of extra virgin olive oil phenolics with favorable changes in markers of oxidative stress and inflammation. Put together, and remember, the bread delivers them together in a single warm bite. You have a food that historically was used for exactly the purposes these studies are now circling, without ever needing to name the molecules. There is one more layer worth naming before we leave the chemistry behind. The bread was almost always eaten with company. It was torn and passed, not sliced and plated. That matters more than it sounds. Eating slowly, in company, chewing thoroughly, means the garlic and oil mixture spends more time in contact with the tissues of the mouth and throat, where those compounds have their most direct surface exposure. A loaf wolfed down in the car, on the way somewhere, does not deliver the same experience the compound profile is optimized for. The ritual of the shared meal is not just cultural window dressing. It is part of what made the food work the way it did. There is a practical reason this bread eventually stopped being daily fare. It simply does not keep. Allicin-rich bread begins to lose its active compound within hours. By the next day, you still have a flavorful loaf, but the antimicrobial chemistry has dropped substantially. In a world built on refrigeration, industrial bread baking, and grocery store logistics, a bread designed to be eaten within hours of baking did not fit. Commercial bread needs shelf life. Active garlic needs the opposite. So over the course of the 19th and 20th centuries, garlic bread transformed into a side dish that looks the part but misses the science almost entirely. Consider the 3 quiet substitutions that hollowed it out. First, fresh crushed garlic was replaced with garlic powder. Garlic powder is made from dehydrated, often pre-cooked cloves. By the time it reaches the jar, alliinase has long since been denatured, and the allicin pathway cannot fire at all. You get aroma and flavor. You do not get the active chemistry. Second, raw olive oil was replaced with butter. Butter is a wonderful fat for many things, but it does not carry oleocanthal, hydroxytyrosol, tyrosol, or oleuropein. The entire phenolic side of the original bread simply disappears. Third, long fermented sourdough was replaced with fast commercial yeast. Traditional sourdough fermentation partially breaks down phytates in the grain and is associated with improved mineral availability and gentler blood sugar response, whereas a 1-hour commercial rise skips that step almost entirely. 3 substitutions, each small on its own, each stripping one layer of what made the original loaf medicinal. What was ancient medicine became a restaurant appetizer. Here is how to make this at home in a way that stays honest to the original. Take 2 cups of whole wheat flour, or a mix of wheat and barley if you can find it. Add 3/4 of a cup of warm water, a teaspoon of coarse salt, and either a teaspoon of dried yeast, or better, a small piece of sourdough starter you have kept alive on the counter. Knead for several minutes until the dough turns smooth and slightly elastic under your hand. Let it rise under a cloth until it has doubled, about an hour for commercial yeast, longer for sourdough. Punch down gently and roll it out thin on a lightly floured surface, aiming for something close to a 1/4 inch thick. Separately, take 4 to 6 garlic cloves and crush them with a small mortar or the flat of a heavy knife blade until they are broken but not pured. Drop them into 3 tablespoons of good cold-pressed extra virgin olive oil. Stir once and walk away for 10 minutes. Come back. The oil will smell sharper than when you left. Spread this mixture across the dough with your fingers, going all the way to the edges. Sprinkle a little more salt, maybe a pinch of oregano or thyme if you have it, and transfer to a preheated baking stone or a heavy iron pan at around 450 degrees. Bake for 6 to 8 minutes total, flipping halfway if you are using a pan. Pull it out. Let it rest only briefly. Eat warm. Eat within the hour. That is the bread. 3,000 years in one recipe. What scripture recorded, what the Egyptian papyri hinted at, what the Roman physician Dioscorides recommended in his 1st century herbal, and what modern molecular research is now circling back toward, is that simple food, prepared with intention, produces measurable effects on the human body. Not miracles, not magic, just the quiet chemistry of plants doing what they were designed to do, delivered in a form the body can actually recognize. 1 Timothy chapter 4 verse 4 says that every creation of God is good, if received with thankfulness. The garlic, the wheat, the olive, received with awareness of what they actually do in the body, still work. They have not changed, only our attention has. So start here, this week. Pick an evening when you have an hour of quiet. Mix the dough, crush the garlic. Watch the clock for those 10 minutes, and notice how much sharper the oil smells when the window closes. Slide the bread onto a hot stone. Pull it off when the edges blister and the kitchen fills with that unmistakable warm scent. Tear a piece off with your hands and eat it standing up, the way people have been doing in that part of the world for 3,000 years. Pay attention to how it tastes, how it sits in the stomach, how it compares to anything sold under the name garlic bread in a modern store. And then, if something in that experience surprises you, do one more thing. Share this with the person in your life who reaches instinctively for antibacterial wipes, for bottled supplements, for the newest shelf-stable miracle, but who has not thought in years about what comes warm out of a stone oven. There is a quieter, older approach to wellness that lives in ordinary food prepared with care. It cost pennies 3,000 years ago. It still does. The bulbs, the oil, the grain, and the heat have not lost a single degree of their power. The only thing that was ever lost was the memory of how to put them together. Bring that memory back into your kitchen and you bring back something that sustained entire civilizations through plagues, sieges, and long journeys. It was never hiding. It was only waiting to be remembered.